I declare the House in committee for the consideration of the Unit Titles Bill.
Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
Members, the House and Committee on the Unit Titles Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Maurice Williamson.
Mr. Chairman, I want to take a very brief call at the beginning to explain to the House that there is an SOP that I have tabled, SOP number 112. And if I can just say to members, this SOP is, although it looks like a very considerable SOP, it's quite a few pages, it's mainly very technical and very minor in its impact overall. Many of the recommended changes are merely just typographical and cross-referencing errors that have been corrected. Some of the recommended changes are drafting changes that reword or reorder or even move clauses around. Mr. Speaker, all the proposed amendments are consistent with the policy intent of the bill, and with those changes recommended by the Select Committee made some quite good recommendations about changes, and I understand they've been corrected, and I hope that the Moana Maki from Labour has got her assurance about what those changes were from officials, because I'm happy for them to be made available to. In particular, the majority of the proposed amendments ensure that people who need to use the processes in the bill have a clear idea of what they need to do and how they're required to do it. And the proposed amendments also respond to issues raised by the Retirement Village Association and the New Zealand Holiday Ownership Council, where recommendations made by the Select Committee had not actually been fully implemented in what came back. An example of a change would be management and governance amendments. The only significant amendment to the management and governance provisions is to how votes are counted for ordinary resolution. The Select Committee recommended that votes for an ordinary resolution be counted according to ownership interests, in addition to one vote per unit. This recommendation was not fully implemented, and the amendment that's put in the SOP achieves it. So that was just a brief outline of what the what the SOP is trying to do, mainly technical and minor. The bill itself is wide-ranging in bringing the whole unit titles legislation up to date. When the first legislation of this nature was done, most people had blocks of units that were 3 or 4 units big, and they were, very small little clustery things. Now you've got massive buildings that are units. So this bill brings into modern parlance things like the duties and powers of the body corporate and the body corporate managers. It enables making joint decision-making body corporate processes more manageable and provides incentives for participation by the unit owners. It has a disputes resolutions process, mandatory disclosure, new ownership structures, and the one that I actually think is important from another portfolio of mine, that's building and construction, mandatory long-term maintenance schedules, because what happens with these big buildings is you get tenants in them and no one puts a maintenance schedule and a funding of how that's to be done, and then 20 years later the place is in a completely state of disrepair and no one's prepared to stump up with how it should have been maintained or who should have paid. So there's a lot of really good things in this. I know this legislation had its gestation back when Labor were in government, and we've carried on with the major ideas. I don't believe that this will be one of the pieces of legislation a big fight will occur in the House, but I'm happy to let members go ahead with questions and try and get the committee stage through.
Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr.